Hello, everyone. Here with me today, I have Mrs. Aileen Kilgore Henderson. I'm very excited about this one. She is a very fascinating person who has lived a fascinating life. You've lived everywhere from Big Bend National Park to Washington, D.C. You've done amazing things in your life, such as fix airplanes during your time in the Women's Army Corps. But I just want to start off a bit with who you are. For those who may not know you, tell us a bit about yourself.
I grew up at Brookwood, did start life at a coal mining camp that's no longer there, Cedar Coal. It was between Vance and Coaling. I had a very happy life there with my three sisters and my mother and father. But then we moved to Brookwood to a farm, and life changed. The Depression came and we had to go to work. After that, I loved school, and we had a better school at Brookwood. There was a new consolidated school there. And so I went to school at Brookwood and graduated. I longed to go to college. My daddy wanted me to go to college, but it just was not possible. So I went to work in the 5 and 10 cent store. Now, it was my daddy who got me out in the world because I wanted to hide in the barn with the animals. I could take care of them when they were sick and all that sort of thing. But my daddy said that would not do, and he was right, of course. And the dime store opened a new world to me. So then, after the dime store, various other things offered, and I ended up in the Women's Army Corps, which many men that I knew said I would be a ruined woman when I came out. But my parents did not object, and it was a marvelous experience. I got a book out of that too.
Well, I'm very excited to talk about that, but let's focus on your time in Tuscaloosa. Your roots are in Tuscaloosa, and although you've moved back and forth, you've seen Tuscaloosa throughout the decades. I'm interested to know what changes you've seen in the Tuscaloosa area over the course of your life.
Many. I guess one of the most important changes has been the loss of the handsome old houses on Greensboro Avenue and in Queen City. There were beautiful homes. One was turned into the library, but the one that was next to it was even more beautiful than it was, and it was torn down. And that was a loss. And of course, when I worked in the dime store, Cress was on Greensboro between Main Street and 6th. And eventually it did move into a new building up on Main Street, what we call Main Street University Boulevard. And the sign is still there up over the front doors. And we did not have shopping malls. Saturday was the day when everybody came to town and they toured the dime stores. That's one way I got the title to the book that's coming out in September, The World Through the Dime Store Door. The world came in, the world of Tuscaloosa came in to the dime store, and my thoughts went out the door to the world. And so it's been a tremendous change. Allen and Jemison was huge back then, and we did not have Bama Theater, and we had the Diamond and the Ritz, and Alabama up on Main Street, and the one skyscraper, the First National Bank
First
building.
National Bank. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
So Big Bend National Park is one of the many places you've lived. How does a woman from Tuscaloosa, Alabama end up there?
When I was in the military in World War II, I was stationed in Texas, and I heard the Texans talking about this new national park down on the Mexican border, Big Bend, and what a strange place it was. It was wild, and renegades hid in there. Texas Ranger would not go into Big Bend alone, so they said all sorts of things. But more than that, animals. I love to hear about the panthers and the antelope and the javelinas and the red racers and the green rattlesnakes, all the strange things that were in the Big Bend area. And I just kept it in my mind. I came home, I got my degree at the university, and I taught school at Northport for 2 years. I had supportive parents. I had very good children. But you know, 42 fourth graders on the salary that I had was not much. And I noticed on a bulletin board at the university that school in West Texas was looking for a degree teacher. They wanted somebody who could teach science. And I jotted down the address, and I had already decided after 2 years at Northport, I would not go back. And so I didn't hear from Texas, but I still gave up my teaching position there at Northport. And I finally got a letter from Texas saying they would like to know more about me, that they were desiring a teacher who could teach science. She needed a degree, and this was a time when Russia was exhibiting so much knowledge of space and that sort of thing, and we were really far behind. So anyway, as it turned out, they accepted me, and I accepted them. Ron?
Yes, ma'am.
I thought I was prepared for West Texas. When I got out there, it scared me to death.
That was my next question. So you're from Alabama and you head to West Texas. So let's talk a bit about your reception and your first impressions of arriving in that Texas town.
It was like an early Texas town. The hotel was like the kind you saw in early cowboy movies, and it was clean. But all the children I saw in the town nearest to the park were so boisterous, they slapped and knocked and dragged and pulled, and I just didn't see how I could teach anybody like that. And I had 80 more miles to go south to the park. The farther we went south, the hotter and barer and more, the mountains terrified me. I had no experience with mountains. And we came upon graves all alone out there in the desert. One was a grave of what looked like a woman and a little baby grave beside her. And oh, it was so hot. I was with my sister, and my sister's dog would have to take a break, and the ground was so hot she couldn't put her feet down. Well, by the time we got to the park, I would not let my sister tell anybody that the new teacher had arrived. We got a room up in the mountains. I went in our cabin, pulled down all the windows and hid. I was just, after dark, I came out and sat on the steps and wondered, what had I done? Next day, I had to make myself known. My sister had to go on to San Diego. About 10 o'clock, I straggled over to the headquarters. The chief ranger was president of the school board. I made myself known to him. Everybody was so gracious and welcoming and excited. Here was the new teacher. But I was still terrified. The school wasn't quite finished, but after it was finished, it was the prettiest little thing, sitting at the base of a mountain range that was entirely enclosed in the park. And it was haunted, of course. It had a lost silver mine in it from the Spanish times. So anyway, I did settle in and found myself in a very interesting situation. I had an apartment attached to the school.
That's very interesting. Let's talk about the school itself, the other teachers and your students. What were they like?
The school was one big room separated by a curtain. We had another teacher. There were two of us. The other teacher's husband worked for the park, so she lived in the park. We divided the grades up. I wanted the older people. She wanted the younger, which was very nice. And so she taught first, second, and third, and I taught fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. And I had about 8 children. It varied because children would come and go, their parents transferred in the park service. We had park service children, and their parents were, some were Mexican, and I believe the cover of the Tenderfoot Teacher book has a Mexican boy on, Eligio. So we had quite a variety, even though there were not many of us. And the girl seated on the right, her father was assistant superintendent of the park. And and Eligio on the left, seated there, standing on the left, his father was a laborer. And it was very interesting that Miss Gertrude, the other teacher, could play the piano. And that added so much to our school days. Every Friday, we had square dancing, folk dancing, it was more like folk dancing, and singing, which was a jolly time for everybody. We heard before school opened that some children were going to come from the ranch, a ranch 40 miles out. That would mean an 80-mile round trip every day for them. But what worried us, one was an older boy, 16, and Miss Gertrude and I felt this boy could be a bad influence in our school. We wasted our worry. When the children commuted in a pickup from the ranch, and they were all eager to go to school, and the big boy was named Bill. He could do a man's work on a ranch, but he never had been to school because this was the largest county in Texas, and he had never been near enough a school to go to it, and he couldn't be spared. But Bill was just a marvel. The younger children looked up to him, and Bill could make them get their lessons, and he could make them behave. And so it worked out so well that our students, so we had a couple of children from Mexico, and as well as those whose parents worked in the park. It was very interesting that we did not have any blacks, and the people in the park were not used to black people. And one day the work crew came upon a car stopped on the road, and inside was a young black woman. And the men began to talk to her, wanted to help her. And she said her husband had walked to get help. And and they said, well, what's the matter with your car? And she said, the guiding bar broke. The guiding bar broke. And that just tickled those men to death to listen to her Mississippi drawl. And it was something they talked about for a week, but they got them back on the road. That was part of their job. But the thing about our school, I had, it was much more relaxed. We could be having our morning lessons, and the mother of the wife of the assistant superintendent of the park might appear at the door with coffee and a sweet roll, and we'd go in my kitchen, leave the children working, and she and I would have coffee, and somebody else would probably drop in, and the other teacher could drop in, and we just had you could never have done that at Northport. But a wonderful thing was, and it was also a reason that I wanted to change. I got a big salary increase going to Texas to teach. And I was in an isolated school, and I got some extra for being in an isolated school. It was the only rural school in Brewster County.
So now let's pivot towards your writing a bit. You have written 2 books about your experience in Big Bend National Park, 1 fiction and 1 nonfiction. Which do you prefer writing more, fiction or nonfiction?
Well, truly, I like fiction because I can use my imagination. I don't have to stick to the facts so much, but I also like nonfiction to get something recorded, to get it down, so that others can read it if they want to and enjoy it. But it was a memorable time, and I was glad that I could, but I could, for example, in the fiction, I could put in stories that were told to me out there. There was a marvelous woman who lived in the park down on the river, and her name was Maggie Smith. She helped the Mexicans. They knew they could come across the river and get help from Maggie for any problem they had. And one day, a Mexican man who had walked a long way came to Maggie bringing a little female lion panther. He told Maggie that the panther was sick, that she had had a brother and he died, and he wanted Maggie to save this little panther. And Maggie raised this panther, and I could put it in the fiction book, which I did. I had it as a sort of character in the fiction book because I was so interested in panthers. The first Spanish I learned, the janitor of the school taught me with the help of the school children, and I'm not sure it's right, but un leon chiquita viva. I add the viva because the ranchers wanted to kill panthers. The park had to make a rule that if a rancher could prove that a panther from the park had predated on his animals, then he could kill it, come in and hunt it and kill it. Otherwise, it was protected, and I was so glad of that. I never got my baby panther, though.
So both of your stories, they share some characters and they definitely share the same location. When you're writing these two books, do you have any trouble keeping the two stories separate?
No, I really didn't. I don't know why it is, but I had no trouble with it overlapping, but there was a period of time, quite a period of time between the two books, which enabled me to be separate from that first one, which was factual. Now, it was interesting about that first book. I submitted it to Texas Christian University Press because I knew they were interested in the Big Bend. The editor called. He said, when I got this manuscript, I thought, oh no, we can't publish anything else about the Big Bend. But he got so interested in reading it. It was so personal and so on the spot, he said, that he knew they had to publish it. So we got busy assembling the pictures to illustrate it. One of them that I was so pleased I had, one of my students, he didn't bring me an apple to the teacher. He brought me a panther foot. He was out at a ranch where they had killed a big panther, and he got the rancher to cut off the panther's foot and bring to me, which was sad, and yet I treasured it for as long as I could.
Mm-hmm. So my introduction to your work was informal. I was at the library and I was making a display for the bicentennial last year. I selected Eugene Allen Smith's Alabama, How a Geologist Shaped the State. I knew this book was written by someone who was very knowledgeable about Alabama. Can you talk a bit about the research that went into writing this book?
Well, it took 10 years, but I had a wonderful librarian at the geology library to help me. And back in the 1930s, when life was so hard on our farm and we were so poor, my daddy had to go to work on the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, a government program. He did typing at the U of A in Smith Hall, and it was a crew typing the journal of Eugene Allen Smith, and they discarded the originals that they had and kept the ones that the typing crew produced. And Daddy would bring home the pages that had interesting and amusing things on them, and for us to enjoy, and I would save them. So in the 1930s, I knew about Eugene Allen Smith. And so when it came to I got into writing, well, that was one of the things I wanted to do. And Louis Dean was the librarian at the geology library, and he was such a help to me. I so appreciated him.
Well, at the end of each of these interviews, I ask everyone the same question. Is there any advice you would give to a young writer?
I have lots of advice, but one of them would be, don't worry. When you're young and you have a job and family and community and church commitments, and there's no time to write, just keep notes and keep a journal, because you forget. And when you do start writing, you can go back. Now, I had letters, many letters in writing about the past, and that was such a help. But you don't know that my first book was not published until I was 74 years old.
Oh, wow.
Now, that's over the hill for a writer, but I have produced several books since then, and it didn't hurt me to have to wait. And I had all this material that I had fortunately carted around the country when we moved, and I could go back to it and be sure that I was right in my remembering. So I would say, do keep a journal. But another thing is, be a member of a writers group if possible. It helps so much when you get down and out from the rejections and from the not being able to place work that you've done, that you need other writers to cheer you on. You need other writers to critique for you. And you must learn to accept criticism. I knew a woman who wrote her first book, her first manuscript. She did not place it, and she would not change it, but she said she wasn't going to write another one until she sold that one, and she never sold that one. You must keep work. And I would say to keep a diary or journal, and to keep your membership in a writers group. And we have the Writers Guild in Tuscaloosa, but also there's a Southern Christian Writers Group, and which is excellent too. And also there's the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. All are available.
Well, that's wonderful advice. And I would like to also thank you for your time today. That was very, yeah, that was very insightful. And I think everyone watching and listening will learn a lot about your life and also a bit about Tuscaloosa as well. So once again, thank you for your time.
I've enjoyed talking with you, Ron. I'm so glad to meet you, and I'm so glad you're doing these programs.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Glad to be doing it.